2 cents. The reason why I'm uploading so much is because I'm not working, so I have a little bit extra time. I was just having a conversation about men not sharing their emotions and their feelings, and I was told by the woman on my Facebook page that I was part of the 1% of men that don't share my emotions and our feelings. No, I'm sorry. I was part of the 1% of men that do share my emotions and my feelings. And then she ended our conversation by telling me that I sound like one of them feminine men that, well, anyway, that's a waste of energy. The point of the video is she defended herself by saying that as a black woman, she's more educated than most black men because black men don't want to get educated. And I responded by saying something to the likes of white men don't want black men to be intelligent. And that's just a simple fact. White men don't want to compete with black men. So the message that I have for black women is the understanding of the dynamic of what's going on in society. If women want to be emotional, but your emotions don't get you nothing. Your emotions won't get you anywhere in life that you want to be. You're supposed to be happy. You're not supposed to be sad. You're not supposed to be angry. You're not supposed to be in distress. You should be content. You should be content, and you should be content. The goal in life is to be content. And women don't want to be content. They want to be euphoric. They want to be in a perpetual state of euphoria. And that is not tangible. You can't obtain euphoria. There is no condition in the objective reality of this life as nirvana. Nirvana is an idea that it only exists in the transcendent afterlife. But that's what the average woman is chasing after. Men are emotional. We are very emotional beings. We are probably more emotional than women. We lead with apathy. I'm sorry, we lead with empathy, and women lead with apathy. We are not apathetic creatures. You can't be an apathetic creature. When a man walks out of a building and holds a door for a woman, that's not an emotional response, like in the negative. That's an understanding in himself the value of who he is and what it means to represent the gentleman. Even if he's an asshole and a piece of shit, he's still gonna pretend like he's a gentleman, right? That doesn't come from a place of logic. That comes from a place of emotion. That's why other men would be like, you know what? F this B. I'm not holding nothing open, and he'll just walk off because it's an emotional reaction. Every decision that a human being makes is always influenced by emotion. What men are not is emotional. We are constantly in a state of feeling something because we are living creatures. We typically don't make decisions based on how we feel. Typically, we try not to. This is the reason why at work I scream at people and they're like, I don't understand why you're upset. I'm not upset. I'm not upset. I was in the army for 6 years. Men are emotional creatures. So if you give a gun to a man and he's an emotional creature and you tell him, hey, private, I need you to go on patrol, and he's got an M16, what is he going to do? He's going to say, fuck you, sergeant. I ain't doing shit. Right? So basic training breaks us of that. Like, that's the whole point. It breaks us of that. Basic training gets real quick when I was 34 years old when I enlisted into the military in the army, full active duty status. I went to Fort Benning, Georgia. I was in the army, running around with the drill sergeants, treating us like shit, understanding that this is just an unnecessary stress test. There is no answer to any of this stuff. No matter what we do, we're never going to be good enough. They're going to constantly drill into us that we fucking suck because they want us to quit. And I'm not a quitter. So no matter what they do or say, nothing's going to change. And guess what? The drill sergeants never messed with me. They didn't have to because I was a 34-year-old man. And they knew that. And they like, leave Private Emerson alone because he'll expose the bullshit that exists in the system that is designed to transition a young 18-year-old boy into a young 18-year-old man, right? But the shit got real when I'm in line, like every day I'm in line for some shit, doing some dumb shit in line, getting processed into the military. It got real when I found myself in line in front of the armory, right? It's just a solid metal door like any other door in all of the. I'm walking around the base all day for the last 2 or 3 weeks. And then, okay, now we're standing in line in front of this door, and they're like, we're going to give you your weapons. And I'm like, okay, they're going to give us our weapons. When I walked up to that counter and they gave me that piece of paper, they give you a sheet of paper and you write your serial number for your gun on it, right? And he put the M16 on the table, and I'm like, okay, M16, whatever. And then he tells me the numbers. I write the numbers off. He takes the paper, they laminate the paper, they give it to you. They say, don't lose this. You're not allowed to lose that paper in basic training. You can't lose your weapon and you can't lose the paper. He gave me the weapon, right? So now we went from a bunch of kids and an old person standing in line with no weapons to a bunch of kids and an old person standing in line with weapons. And guess what? Everybody hated the old man. Nobody could stand me. 50% of the people respected me and 50% of them didn't like me. So now here I am standing in this line with over 80 individuals, and all of us have unloaded M16s. And then the drill sergeants marched us back to our barracks, and they locked our weapons up with us and said, from now on, you will be moving with weapons. And they're still unloaded. But the shit clicked real fast for me. Like, oh shit, this is they're gonna give these children, these same people that I've been dealing with for the last 3 or 4 weeks, they're about to give them guns. And I know they don't like me. And now they're gonna give all of them guns. And then women are like, man, don't be emotional. Like, this is why we're not emotional. This is why we're not emotional. Because if you don't like me and you have animosity for me and you've been carrying around for me around for months and years and you can't stand to look at me, and you come around a corner with a loaded M16, you're like, you know what, fuck you, bam, and now I'm fucking dead because you're operating from your emotions, right? So the average male in society is conditioned not to make emotional decisions, because emotional decisions result in irrational behavior, and irrational behavior is anarchy in a society, right? So men communicate how we feel, but we don't express how we feel. Women express how they feel while not communicating how they feel. And that's the difference. A woman doesn't express what she wants. She expresses whatever it is she needs to express so she can get whatever it is she's trying to obtain indirectly. That's what makes them emotional, irrational creatures. If a man is hungry, he doesn't say, baby, how do you feel about eating tonight? He says, baby, can I have a sandwich, right? But women will talk about everything other than what she wants. Those are the difference in the extremes. So it's not like we don't have emotions or that we don't feel emotional or anything like that. We do all that stuff. We do all that stuff probably more than women do. We're just simply raised to be in control of that part of who we are. We are in control of that animal. So this video says a message to black women, and I'm going to explain something that needs to be understood when it comes to the brand My 2 Cent. Like she said, black men don't want to be educated. They don't want to be blah, blah, blah. Okay, this is Aristotle's Politics. There's an introduction. And then it starts. Book 1. Twelve 15:2 A1. Every state is a community of some kind, and every community is established with the view of some good. For men can always act in order to obtain that which they think is good. But if all communities aim at some good, the state or political community, which is the highest of all, and which embraces all the rest, aim at good in the greatest degree than any other, and at the highest good. Some people think that the qualification of a stateman's king, household, and master are the same, and that they differ not in kind, but only in the number of their subjects. For example, the ruler over a few is called a master, over the manager of a household, or a still larger number, a stateman or king, as if there were no difference between a great household and a small state. The distinction which is made between king and the stateman is as follows. When the government is personal, the ruler is a king. When, according to the rules of the political science, the citizen rules, and are ruled in turn, then he is called a statesman. But all this is a mistake, for government differ in kind, as will be evident to anyone who considers the matter according to the method which has hitherto guided us. As in other departments of science, so in politics, the compound should always be resolved into the simple elements, or at least part of the whole. We must therefore look at the elements of which the state is composed in order that we may see in what the different kind of rules differ from one another, and whether any scientific result can be attained about each one of them. He who thus considers things in their first growth and origin, whether a state or anything else, will obtain the clearest view of them. In the first place, there must be a union of those who cannot exist without each other, namely of male and female, that the race may continue. And this is a union which of form and this is a union which of form not of deliberate purpose, but because in common with other animals and with plants, mankind have a nature desire to leave behind them an image of themselves, and of a natural rule and subject, that both may be preserved. For which can be foreseen by the exercise of mind is by nature intended to be Lord and Master, and that which can with its body give effect to such foresight as a subject, and by name a slave. Hence, master and slave have the same interest. Now, nature has distinguished between the female as the slave, for she is not niggardly. And I want you to see it for yourself. Now, nature has distinguished between the female as a slave, for she is not niggardly, like the smith who fashions the dolphin knife for many uses. She makes each thing for a single use, and every instrument is best made when intended for one and not for many uses. But among barbarians, no distinction is made between woman and slave, because there is no natural rule among them. They are a community of slaves, males and females. Wherefore the poets say, "It is meet that the Hellenes should rule over barbarians," and as if they thought that the barbarians and the slaves were by nature one. Out of these two relationships between man and woman, master and slave, the first thing to arise in the family and Hides is right, and when he says, "First house and wife with an ox for the plow," for the ox is the poor man's slave. The family is associated, established by nature for the supply of man every want, and members of it are called Chaurandans, companions of the clipboard, and by Epimedes and Cretans, companions of the manager. But when several families are united and the associate aim at something more than the supply of daily needs, the first society to be formed is the village. And the most natural form of the village appears to be that of a common form, a colony from the family, composed of the children and grandchildren who are said to be suckled with the same milk. And this is the reason why Hellenic states were originally governed by kings, because the Hellenes were under royal rule before they came together. And as the barbarians still are, every family is ruled by the eldest, and therefore, in the colonies of the family, the kingly form of government prevailed, because they were of the same blood, as Homer says. Each one giving laws to the children and to his wife, for they lived desperately, as was the manner in ancient time. Wherefore men say that the gods have a king, but they themselves either are or were in ancient time under the rule of a king. For they imagine not only the form of the god, but their way of life to be like their own. When several villages are when several villages are united in a single complete community large enough to be nearly or quite self-sufficient, the state comes into existence, or originating in the bare needs of life and continuing in existence for the sake of a good life. And therefore, if the early forms of society are natural, so is the state, For it is the end of them and the nature of a thing that is its end. For what each thing is, when fully developed, we call it nature. Whether we are speaking of a man, a house, a family. Beside the final cause and end of the thing is the best, and to be sufficient is the end and the best. Hence, it is evident that the state is a creation of nature, and that man is by nature a political animal, and he who by nature and not by mere accident is without a state is either a bad man or above humanity. He is likely the tribalist, lawless, hitherless one. Now, I could keep going on forever and ever and ever, but I don't think I need to. What I'm going to say is this: Europeans have established themselves as human beings, and they have dichotomized humanity into progressively diminishing percentages of humanity. There is a relationship. Okay, at the highest state of being is the Uberman. We are humanity, Homo sapiens, sentient sapiens. There are transcended states above where we are, and there are transcended states below where we are. Directly below sentient sapiens is the nigger, and directly below that is um directly below that would be retardation or mental illness. And the reason why they are one above each other is because to be mentally ill is to not be a functional member of society, right? Caucasians want artificial intelligence. They want they want the intelligence of a human being and the obedience of a canine. That's what they want. That's the goal of the nigger. When it came to the African American, my theory, my premise of what happened when it comes to slavery in America is two conditions, two primary conditions. The most important condition is Europeans prove to themselves that God doesn't exist. That was the first premise. The second premise was if humans evolved from animals, then there must exist a condition somewhere below human and above animal. And they classified that as a nigger. And they realized that if we can breed dogs and horses and cattle and everything else, then we should be able to breed out humanity and create a more intelligent animal that could be functionally more capable of achieving the things that we need while simultaneously inheriting all of the goodness that is embodied in a cattle. And they call that chattel slavery. That was the goal. The goal was to create a race of people that would be less than human but greater than animal. And when it came to here in America, they took all those values and they associated it with the African. They was like, well, I mean, what if okay, if we're gonna say that slavery is inherent and you have a child, then how do we know that a slave is a slave and a human is a human? So they created the idea of, well, they didn't create the idea of white and black. They created the idea of chattel slavery and institutional slavery for life because it's an important distinction. So this was the dynamic. You had Caucasian men and women, Caucasian mothers and fathers, and you have African men and women, African mothers and fathers. When they first came to America, they were equal, right? If a African man has a child with an African woman, that child will come out African. If a Caucasian man has a child with an African woman, the same way that that woman said, I must be part of 1% of people that 1% of the men that expresses my emotions. Statistically, if a Caucasian man has a child with an African woman, the child will come out dark, right? And statistically, if a Caucasian woman has a child with an African man, the child will come out dark, statistically, right? Doesn't mean that it always happens that way, but statistically, that's what happens, especially back then when the genes were more pure and they hadn't been mixed for the generations of the present. So with that understanding, the question was, if I'm a white man and my son is a human and I have sex with a white woman, my son is going to look like me and he's going to be human. But if I have sex with a black woman and my son comes out dark-skinned, is my son still human? Is my son still human? The answer is always yes. It's common sense. But politically, as a political animal, does my son inherit my right to be a freeman, or does my son inherit his mother's status as a slave? And in those generations, without any type of paperwork or DNA test, they didn't have any way to clearly define it. So they said Africans will be slaves for life, and anyone that is of dark skin will be a slave, and anyone that is of light skin will be free. And if white women want to go out and have sex with black men and produce black children, their children will be slaves for life. And this is where the animosity that white women have for white men comes from. This is where the animosity comes from, because they've been limited in their choice. I have to choose to have either a father that is going to be a free man in status, or I have to choose to have a father that's going to have a child that's going to have chattel slavery as its status. Because for the longest time, white women were allowed to raise their children with the status they inherited from their complexion as freemen. So you could have a black child as a white woman, and that child would still be recognized with your status as a free woman. Your child would be a free man. So that dark-skinned child would inherit its freedom as a person. This is the reason why in history, when they show you black people walking around with freedom on plantations where black men and women were also enslaved in history accounts of American history, that's the part they don't explain to you. They don't explain to you that these dark-skinned people that were free were the descendants of white men and white women and African chattel slavery that bought their freedom, because they don't waste time in movies to explain things accurately. They just show you Django walking around as a free man, and they don't explain how he became a free man. But he had one of those three conditions. His father was white, his mother was black, his mother was white, his father was black, or his biological black parents earned their freedom and had a child that was also recognized as a freeman, right? So black women want to sit here and act like they are somehow superior to black men because white men want black men to serve them. There's absolutely nothing wrong with me working as a free man for another free man, regardless of our ethnicity. But don't twist the societal norm that the shit doesn't fucking exist, and that when I go apply for a job, they don't want to work with me because they want me to recognize in myself that I'm a fucking nigger. Don't twist it up and act like it's not the case. Don't pretend like that's not what's going on in the world and hasn't been going on in the world for thousands of fucking years. Aristotle wrote the shit down when he was alive hundreds of years before America was even formed. So don't act like it's a fucking accident. Don't act like the values aren't there. White men told white women that they were slaves. So the feminist movement for white women is based on that. But black women aren't slaves. Black men and black women are slaves. So don't sit there on your high horse and think that because white men are empowering you to oppress your own brothers and sons and husbands that you're superior. You're not fucking superior. You're not superior. Because if you were superior, there would be no need for you to operate under a white man. If you want to know who's in charge, and if you want to know who has all the authority, and if you want to know who has all the power, follow the money. The richest men on this planet get a check from who? From some fucking European. Pick any rich African American, whoever they are, and ask them where they got their money from. Some European. The African countries are exchanging European currency. Why is the African countries exchanging European currency? Why are Europeans in control of African resources? Because the Africans have been labeled as the barbarians. The Africans have been labeled by Europeans based on the politics of Aristotle as barbarians. And as barbarians, they are simply good as tools. And their households are formed under the same principles that I just read to you, that the man and the woman are simply slaves. The male is the slave and the woman is the slave. They are chattel property and they're only allowed to operate at their scale. The leaders of the world will always be the free men of the Caucasians and the Europeans. So let's get to this term white, because I'm so goddamn tired of having this conversation. White is a term that originated in America to describe the 13 colonies of the Americans during the Revolutionary War. When Europeans came to America and set up the colonies, they set up 13 plus colonies. And each colony represented one of the European nations that had a stake in this country when they came here, and the Native Americans and the indigenous tribes were here, right? They were fighting amongst each other, these Europeans, based on the politics of nations on the other side of the world. So when they got tired of being taxed, because the Europeans wanted, the 13 European countries that sent Americans here wanted raw resources extracted here in America to be exported back to Europe so they could be processed in Europe and final products being sold here in America. It was illegal for the 13 colonies to produce their own products because they wanted to sell products to the American colonies. They wanted them to be slaves. They wanted them to cut lumber, sell the lumber to Europe, have European crafters craft culturally correct items to be sold here in America. And then all of the stores and everything that was being bought by American colonies was all stuff that was shipped from European countries. And you have carpenters in America like, why can't I build a table? It's illegal for you to build a table. You have to go buy one that was made in a European country. And they're like, but that doesn't make any sense. We have the raw resources here. Why can't we just make our own goods? We pay you for your goods and you pay us for our crafts, but you're taxing us. You're taxing us on the things that we buy. I'm sorry, you're taxing us on the things we sell to you, and then you want to tax us on the things that we buy from you. And then you want to manufacture stuff to give to us while infringing on our right to just build stuff for ourselves. So the American colonies revolted. Like, that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make sense for me to have to wait for shipments to come from a country that I've never seen, right? So when the 13 colonies revolted, they were revolting in their own kind. British was revolting for its own right. France was revolting for its own right. Germany was revolting for its own right. All of these colonies in America were revolting in their own right, under their own constitutions, for their own reasons, against their own governments. And the Europeans that were sending troops here to fight the war was exploiting it. They're like, we can just work together to oppress the Europeans. Because you have armies like the British are like, hey, I need you to, France is like, I got a rebellion over here. Can you supply me with some of your British soldiers? These are the native soldiers that have been sent to America and are in, what we would call embassies in America. My British colonies are rebellion, and I don't have enough native British soldiers to oppress them. Can you send me your native French soldiers to help me squash this American rebellion? And so the French are like, yes, because we have the same stakes. If you lose your colony, I lose my colony. So we will share amongst each other our own resources so we can continue to control our colonies together. And the 13 colonies are looking at this like, why is the British and the French fighting us unified when they have governments that don't even get along? Like, you're governing us differently, but you're able to come together with each other so you don't want me and the French colonies to interact with each other because you're different political bodies. But when it comes to oppressing us, you're willing to join forces to oppress us while simultaneously telling us that there's a defensive front between us. So the United States, the 13 colonies of America, said, we are officially all white. We're going to all unite together. We're going to call this the Union, and we're going to unionize together, and we're going to be white. And they wrote the Declaration of Independence based on the fact that all 13 colonies were unified and created equal, and that all of these white men from these different nations that they've never visited, never seen, and were never a part of, are all recognizing that they have the same equal value. And there was that one person in the back, Paul Amerson, the white dude, that was like, I have a question. If all men are created equal, what are we going to do with the Africans? And they just said the Africans aren't men. They're not men. They're slaves. They're not men. They don't have the same quality of being that white people have. And you have to recognize that when you are born into a system of slavery and you're raised as a child with this idea that you are inferior and those people that don't look like you are inferior, and they're next to chickens and cows and ducks and pigs and trees, and like, it doesn't make any sense logically that they wouldn't, like, it's so natural to your existence that you don't question it. It takes somebody outside of that to bring the validity of those questions and those arguments to recognize in that. So they united under the idea of white. And then they fought off the colonies. They revolted. That was the United States Revolutionary War. And then when they reformed the country, the first thing that they wanted to do was make sure that the Europeans never came back and took the country back. So the North was smart enough and wise enough to say, we need to have taxes so that we can maintain a standing army. And the South was like, we've got free slavery. We don't need taxes. We've got enough money to maintain a stable army. We can pay our soldiers whatever we need to pay them because we make infinite money off of our slaves. And the North is like, it's not sustainable. Slavery is not going to be sustainable in this country. There's no way that we're going to be able to maintain that because we can't import slavery because we've rebelled against the Atlantic slave trade. Like, how do you expect us to get any goods or commerce to come into the country when we just told them to stop giving us goods and commerce? And the South is like, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but we've been doing this thing for so long that there's no reason for us to think that it will ever change. And the North is like, but it's going to have to change if we want it to change, right? So that was that was the Civil War between the Confederate and the Union. And the Union was kicking the Confederates' ass because they had infinite free labor. So the Confederates was like, we've got to break up this slavery thing, not because it's morally just, but because if we don't, the Union is going to take over the world. It's going to take over America, and then the Union's going to fall to the Britons. So it doesn't even matter if we lose. I don't care about losing to the Union. I don't want the 13 colonies to come back and take over because we're fighting a war against 13 nations that are older than we are, and they don't want to, and the Union don't want to recognize how inferior we are to those naval forces on the other side of the globe. So we have to abolish slavery so that we can unite and be stronger. And that is the reason why the United States has the greatest army in the planet, because our biggest fear is that the Great Britain army is gonna come back and conquer us. And as soon as we show any fucking weakness, that's exactly what's gonna happen. That is exactly what's gonna happen. But in our legislation is all of that bullshit from hundreds of years ago. And when these governments are doing all these laws and passing these judgments on us, they keep pulling those racist ass laws out and using them to justify bullshit. That's what makes it institutional racism. That's what makes it institutional racism. Black women want to sit here and feel like they're superior to black men because they're serving white men. You know what that's called? Cheating. It's called cheating. Your allegiance should only be to your man. The black community doesn't need white people for any damn thing. If we would stop giving our money to foreigners and start doing business with ourselves, we wouldn't need foreigners. But black women are afraid that white men will destroy us again. They have that inherent irrational fear from hundreds of years of oppression. And that's just the reality of the nature. And black men are too busy either being civic and not aggressive when we need to be, or too aggressive when we're supposed to be being passive. And that's the reason why we can't get anywhere, because we're on the wrong side of every fight. And the reason why we're on the wrong side of every fight is because we don't know that there's a war taking place. We don't understand that Aristotle already wrote this shit out. You are a fucking nigger. And no matter what you do in this world, you will always just be a tool for someone else to use. And what you're supposed to do is, while you're being used as a tool, you're supposed to be reminding them every fucking second of every fucking day that you're not a fucking nigger. The same way that your wife bitches and complains about how she feels about how you treat her in her house is the way you're supposed to approach them every goddamn day and remind Europeans that you're fucking equal. Every goddamn second of every fucking day, they're supposed to be reminded that we're equal. Because if you don't do that, 400 fucking years of slavery will return. And it's not some shit that's in the Bible. This is legislated bullshit that we know is true. We experience racism every day, so we know that this stuff is true. We pretend like it's going away. Elon Musk said he is all about the free speech. But the moment somebody said, let's have a discourse about institutional racism in the world, the first thing he said was, we shouldn't talk about that. Why not, Mr. Elon Musk? Why shouldn't we talk about racism? Why is it okay to talk about everything else but racism? Because I don't want to recognize in myself that the reason why I am the president of SpaceX is because I am a Caucasian from South Africa. I don't want to have that conversation with myself. It makes me feel uncomfortable to believe that I haven't achieved anything great in my life as a man. I was just handed these things because I am a part of a privileged class. But that's just the reality of the situation. Because the reason why the vast majority of African American males are not where we want to be, we're not failures, but the reason why we're not where we want to be in life is because we have too many unjust, unethical, illegal, and immoral obstacles standing in our way. And when we stand on legality, morality, and ethics, we don't move as fast as we're supposed to, but we move at the speed that we should be moving at. And I can rant and rave all fucking day. But as always, my name is Paul Emerson, and I've given you my 2 cents.